Hello, my name is Tracy Metz, and I'm the director of the John Adams Institute. What do? We bring the best and the brightest of American thinking to the Netherlands. Now, with Corona, of course, we're bringing them to you online rather than live, but at some point they'll be back in person. So who was John Adams? He was one of the founding fathers of the United States. He was an ambassador to France and the Netherlands from 1782 to 1788, and he was the second president of the US from 1797 to 1801. What we also do is organize lectures for high school kids like you. We call this the Quincy Club, and it's named after John Quincy Adams, John Adams' son, and the sixth president of the United States. Talented family. This year, the theme of the Quincy Club is, of course, the elections. Tomorrow, it's the big day. The lectures have been given by Albertine Bloemendal, and she is doing an extra talk today online. Albertine is an expert on America and teaches and researches American politics, history, and the relationship between America and Europe. She works at the Radboud University in Nijmegen. It's also interesting to note that she worked as a journalist for Trouw, the newspaper Trouw, and covered the elections in 2008 and 2012. So take it from me, she knows her stuff. Her story has two parts. The first part is about the system, how does the electoral system work, and then about the people, especially this year's candidates, Trump and Biden. Albertine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this student webinar, this high school student webinar about the US presidential elections. The title I gave to my lecture is The Most Important Elections Ever. Why did I pick this title? Well, let's take a look at what the candidates have to say about this.
Did you know that 2020 is the most important election of our lifetimes, if not ever? If you don't believe me, both candidates told us so at their recent conventions.
All elections are important, but we know in our bones this one is more consequential. This is a life-changing election. This will determine what America is going to look like for a long, long time.
This is the most important election in the history of our country. This election will decide whether we save the American dream or whether we allow a socialist agenda to demolish our cherished destiny.
In the history of the United States, is what Donald Trump said. Well, you know, if you follow US presidential elections or any campaign, you'll see that candidates will say that every single time, particularly when they are on the ballot. So they want to make people enthusiastic, they want to create a sense of urgency, tell you that it really matters that you are going to vote, and preferably for them, of course. So, you know, watching these videos can make one a little bit skeptical at times. But if we look at what the American people think, we see that this year, more voters say that it really matters who wins the presidency than in the last 20 years. And I think there is a clear choice between these two candidates. Joe Biden and Donald Trump have really presented different visions about the direction they want to take the country in. So the American people really seem to believe it really matters this year who wins the elections.
But does it also matter for us here in the Netherlands?
Yes, good question. Why on earth? Why should we focus on the American presidential elections?
We don't seem to be able to talk about anything else.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I think it does matter. The United States has been our main ally since the Second World War. It's one of our key trading partners. And Joe Biden and Donald Trump have not just presented different visions for domestic policies, but also for foreign policy. And, well, if we look at security policy, for example, the United States well, we still very much depend on the United States for our security. And Donald Trump has been very critical of NATO, for example. And I think that Joe Biden has demonstrated some more commitment when it comes to NATO. So I think that matters for us. But also, if you look at issues like climate change, it really matters what the United States does, what course, what direction the nation will choose. And Donald Trump, of course, has pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and Joe Biden wants to, basically wants the United States to recommit to those climate goals. So I think it really does matter. These kinds of choices also affect us here in the Netherlands.
We don't live in a bubble anymore.
We definitely
just a European bubble.
Don't live in a bubble anymore. No. Let's take a look at what we're going to do during the lecture. As you said, the lecture consists of two parts. First, we'll look at the American system. It's a little bit more theoretical. Political foundations, the power of the president, presidential elections, how do they work, the rules of the game. And then we'll move to the 2020 elections. Who are the candidates, key themes and issues, and how and where do the candidates campaign? But we start all the way at the beginning. The United States came into being during a revolutionary war against the English monarchy. There were 13 colonies on the east coast of the North American continent. And one of the key issues that eventually led to the American Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, was about taxation. These colonies had to pay taxes to the English crown, to the English Empire, but they were not represented in the English Parliament. So they protested against this. The English did not really appreciate that. And after some time, this led to a violent conflict that we now know as the American Revolutionary War. In 1776, the founding fathers officially declared American independence through a document that was quite revolutionary. The Declaration of Independence. And there were some ideas in it particularly inspired by Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke, for example, the idea that people were born with certain rights, that just by being born, people had certain rights. That was a revolutionary idea at the time. And the founding fathers wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was a revolutionary idea at the time.
It was a whole new idea about our relationship to government, huh?
Yes, that as well.
Yeah.
Because they also argued, we are not just the subjects of a king or of an empire, of the English Empire. We want the government to be there for us. The government should be about we the people. They have to represent our interests, our safety, our they have to look out for that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, in a sense.
On the one hand, we want leadership. On the other hand, we feel that government should serve us. Interesting,
yes,
huh?
That's interesting.
Yeah. A whole new idea.
This was a revolutionary idea at the time. And of course, when they were unhappy with the way in which the government represented their interests, they wanted to have a say in picking another government. And of course, elections play an important role in that. Now, during the first years of this new country, the Americans used a temporary constitution known as the Articles of Confederation. There wasn't a president. It was not very effective. There was not a very strong national government. So after a while, the founding fathers came together again, and in 1787, they signed the U.S. Constitution that they still use to this very day.
Albertine, is our hero of the day John Adams on this painting?
John Adams. Well, as you mentioned in your introduction...
They all kind of look alike with these wigs on.
Yeah, they do. They do. Well, John Adams was one of the key founding fathers, of course, but he's actually not in this painting. John Adams also didn't sign the Constitution. Another founding father who's not here is Thomas Jefferson. And both Jefferson and John Adams were representing their new country abroad in Europe.
That's right. John Adams was in France and the Netherlands then.
And John Adams was in London, in England at the time, but Jefferson was in France. And later, John Adams also went to the Netherlands, of course.
Well, he did miss a very important moment in American
He
history,
did.
I'm sorry to say.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And with this new constitution, the United States became a constitutional democracy in which the limits of political power are very clearly demarcated in that constitution, and citizens have the right to send away poorly performing governments. That also brings us to that question, how much power does the president actually have? Because we tend to focus very much on the president. Also now the presidential elections is all we talk about, while there are also elections for Congress, for example. So how much power does the president actually have? Well, if we ask him himself, this is what he might say.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total. And that's the way it's got to be.
Your authority is total.
It's total. It's total.
Yes, if you are the president of the United States, the authority is total, is what Donald Trump said. And you already hear some voices in the background asking questions. Is it? Are you sure? Is the authority of the president total? And the reason for that is that this was not really what the founding fathers had in mind when they drafted the Constitution. With the experience of that English empire still fresh in their minds, which they experienced to be tyrannical, they wanted to make sure that not too much power would end up in the hands of one institution or one individual. And to make sure that that wouldn't happen, they created a separation of powers. And they did so on multiple levels. First of all, they created a federal system. That system limits the power of the entire national federal government by creating a separation of powers between that national government on the one hand and individual states on the other hand. So you will see that in the United States, there are many things, many issues, many rules that states can determine for themselves, also when it comes to elections.
You told it just now, and I never really stopped to think about that. You told us just now that in that period between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that was, 12, 13 years? Really quite a long time. That there was this loose federation that didn't work very well. And the states were already then very independent, huh?
Yes, the states were very independent. Actually, they had most of the power. During that period. They didn't have a very strong central government, but
Maybe they didn't want one.
Well, that has always been a big debate in American history, and to this very day, the states' rights are very, very important. So yes, absolutely, but it wasn't necessarily very effective because you also need someone to lead, for example. Decisions need to be made, sometimes very quickly. And that was way more difficult with a loose government. It was like the states send their ambassadors to, a conference like the United Nations in a sense, and they had to make national policy together there. And that can take a while to reach decisions, etc.
I think it's an interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it is an interesting tension in the whole foundation of the United States. That on the one hand, the states are very independent. Each state has their own laws about voting. We'll come to that.
Yes.
But at the same time, you see that the president is almost a godlike figure in the U.S., much more than, for example, here in the Netherlands, Prime Minister Rutte, who we see arriving on his bicycle for crisis discussions in the Katshuis. So there's this strong force for states' rights, but at the same time, the leader of this everything is so up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Never ceases to amaze me.
I can imagine. So they created a division of power, separation of powers between the federal government and the states on the one hand, but they also created a division of powers, a separation of powers within the national government. They divided the power between the executive branch, represented by the president, the vice president, and the cabinet, the legislative branch, Congress, which consists of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the judicial branch, which at its very highest level is represented by the Supreme Court. And all of these branches have been given a bit of power. that the other branches did not get. And they have also been given the ability to check each other's powers. So, for example, the president can't just make laws. The president cannot make laws. The president has to execute laws. Congress makes the laws. So the president is dependent on Congress for making the laws. When Congress has made a law, it does have to go back to the president, who can veto a law if he doesn't like the law for some reason. Then it goes back to Congress, and they need a greater majority to overrule the president's veto. But the president can't just go around doing whatever he or she wants. Also, the Supreme Court checks the power of the president, for example. So they have created a separation of powers as well as a system of checks and balances. And I think it's actually good to take a quick look at the Supreme Court for a moment.
The Supreme Court has been in the news almost every day for the past weeks.
Yes, absolutely. And
whoever knew that this was such a linchpin of American politics?
It has been in the news a lot during the last couple of weeks, and that all had to do with the fact that Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away some weeks ago. And according to the US Constitution, the president is allowed to nominate a new Supreme Court judge. But he can't just do this alone, and there we have a good example of that system of checks and balances, at least how it is written down in the Constitution. The president needs the approval of the Senate for a Supreme Court appointment. And of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a legendary judge, also did a lot for women's rights, for example.
She's the tiny lady on the front row, eh?
Yes, yeah. Tiny lady on the front row, the older lady on the front row. She passed away, and she was a quite liberal judge, and Donald Trump had promised to appoint conservative judges. That was one of his campaign promises in 2016, and something that he has also done. Before this happened, he had already appointed 2 more conservative Supreme Court judges, and now he nominated Justice Barrett to replace Justice Ginsburg, and the Senate recently approved this appointment. And it's important, I think, also to take a look at this because it also demonstrates that it really matters which party has a majority in the Senate. So, for example, 4 years ago, Barack Obama was president, and he was in a similar situation in the sense that he got to appoint or nominate a new Supreme Court judge, but he had to deal with a Republican majority in the Senate, and they decided not to vote on this new Supreme Court judge until after the elections, and then, of course, Donald Trump won the presidency and got to nominate another Supreme Court judge, which demonstrates that the president can't always do whatever he wants.
I remember also in the election of 2000, which is 20 years ago for our audience, an eternity. But I remember in 2000 there was an election where Al Gore and George Bush were the candidates, and the results of the election were so closely and so contested that the Supreme Court ultimately decided who was to be president.
Yes, that's true.
So, I mean, that is total proof of how important they are.
Yes, so Congress is important, and the Supreme Court is also very important. And, well, what you mentioned, there can be situations in which the Supreme Court has to decide on the elections, for example, and Donald Trump has mentioned this as well.
President Trump, could happen this year too.
That could happen this year too, yeah. Donald Trump has actually said we need to make sure that there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court on Election Day in case something like this happens.
Because otherwise there could be a tie.
Yes, so exactly. Even number, if there were 8 judges on the Supreme Court, the decision could be 4 against 4, and so you need an extra judge to break the tie. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at Congress as well, because I think that this example also demonstrated that it is very important which party has a majority in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. As you could see, Congress is divided into the Senate and House of Representatives, a bit like Eerste Tweede Kamer in the Netherlands, not exactly the same thing. And I just want to point out that it is really important to also watch the outcome of the congressional elections. So the Senate, there are elections this year also, tomorrow, for 1/3 of all the seats in the Senate. So senators represent an entire state, and they are elected for a period of 6 years. But every 2 years, there are elections for 1/3 of the Senate. And as you can see at the moment, Republicans have a majority in the Senate, and Democrats have a majority in the House of Representatives. And the representatives in the House of Representatives are elected for a period of 2 years. Every 2 years, there are elections for all the seats in the House of Representatives. And
so these people are campaigning all the time.
Yes, they are. They're campaigning
all the time.
all
Do
the
they ever
time.
get around to running the country?
Yeah, also somewhat. But they really have to keep campaigning because, well, every 2 years, that's a short period to deliver. Well, they also have to deliver, right? So they do have to govern, and they do have to do more than campaigning. Whereas the Senate, so there are 100 senators in the Senate. That is because every state gets 2 senators, no matter the amount of people, the number of people living in a state. And this is different in the House of Representatives. These representatives don't represent an entire state, but they represent a very specific district, a little geographical area within the state. And this means that every 10 years, all the people in the US have to be counted to determine how many representatives each state gets. This is the census.
The census, yeah.
So this happened in 2010, and this year is also a census year. And based on the census, each state gets a number of representatives. So here on the map, you see for example, on the left, you see number 55. That is in the state of California. Exactly.
My state.
Your state. Well, look at that. On the left coast, so to say, 55 representatives, and that is because it's a very populous state, California, and they have 2 senators, like every other state, in the Senate, and 53 representatives, so 53 districts. And it's important to keep this map in mind for a moment, to remember, because it's also very important to understand the US presidential elections. Actually, let's take a look at those presidential elections. The system that Americans use to elect their president is quite different from the system that we are used to, and I guess actually from all other systems around the world. They use a so-called Electoral College system. And the key thing to remember when you watch the US presidential elections is that winning the US presidential elections is not about winning the most votes in the country totally.
Like the popular vote.
The popular vote. That is the popular vote. So it is not about the popular vote. It is about winning in the Electoral College.
Because Hillary won the popular vote last time, but Trump still became president.
Exactly. Yes, and that was not the first time that happened. And it could happen again this year. So keep this in mind. It's not about winning the popular vote. It is about winning in the Electoral College. So what does this mean? Well, when American citizens vote, this is what they will see in the voting booth. They can vote for Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Kanye West in some states and his birthday party. But officially, they do not vote for the president directly, but they vote for representatives from their states, so-called electors, who have vowed to vote for a certain presidential candidate. And the amount of electoral votes that each state gets, the amount of electors, and electors are kiesmannen in Dutch, and the Electoral College is het kiescollege. And the number of electoral votes each state gets is based on the number of representatives that each state has in the House in Congress. So that's why it was important to to take a look at that. So here we again see California, the number 55, because, as I mentioned, California has 55 representatives in Congress. That means that they also get 55 electoral votes. So that brings us to the question, how can a candidate win those votes in the Electoral College? Well, all these states basically organize their own elections, and the candidate who wins most of the votes in a state, so basically the popular vote within a state, wins all the electoral votes that one can win.
So this is a winner-takes-all system?
It's a winner-takes-all system, yes. There are only 2 states that use a different system, but overall it's a winner-takes-all system.
And are the electors duty-bound to vote in line with the popular vote?
They are officially. They have to yes. So in those states,
well, yes, but I hear you say.
Yes, but there is such a thing as faithless electors. So it happens almost every time that a few electors do not vote as they had promised. This also happened 4 years ago. So that's it can happen, but so far this has never determined the outcome of the elections. So it wasn't necessarily very consequential for the outcome. But it can happen. And different states have different rules about how to deal with these faithless electors. So
we have 538 electors.
Yeah.
That means that you need half plus 1 to have a
That's
majority.
right.
You need 270 votes.
Yes, you cannot win the elections in the Electoral College with just a plurality of votes. So you really need to win a absolute majority. So more than half of the votes. And yes, 538 votes in total. So to win the presidential elections in the United States, a candidate really needs to win a majority. That means 270 electoral votes or more.
But 538 is an even number. So there could be a tie.
There could be a tie.
In theory.
In theory, there could be a tie. It has happened, but that was in 1800. There were 2 candidates who received the same number of electoral votes. And basically what happens if no one gets 270 electoral votes, no one gets to that majority, the House of Representatives gets to pick the next president of the United States.
And that also, something similar happened to John Quincy Adams, I seem to remember.
Yes, in fact, yes, that was a case in which no candidate received 270 votes. Well, actually, they had the Electoral College had a different makeup. There weren't 538 electoral votes, but a lower number because this is also based on the population, etc. But what happened was that there were 4 candidates, and Andrew Jackson won the popular vote as well as most votes in the Electoral College, but not enough for a real majority. And Congress the House of Representatives got to decide, and they picked John Quincy Adams, who actually came in second.
Phew.
So, yeah, there you go.
He got in by the skin of his teeth, as we would say.
That's right. Yes. And as you mentioned, sorry, I had the wrong slide there. Just to wrap it up, if the US presidential elections were a game, of course it's not, if it were a game, there would be 538 points to win in total. And in each state, a candidate can win a number of points based on the state's representation in Congress. In most states, except for Maine and Nebraska, the candidate who wins the most votes gets all the points that you can win in that state. And the candidate who wins 270 points or more wins the presidency. And as you mentioned, this means that a candidate can win the US presidential elections by getting fewer votes than his or her opponents. And this happened in 2016, when Hillary Clinton received almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did.
And still.
But still lost because Donald Trump won more votes in the Electoral College. Yeah. So now you are familiar with the rules of the game, so to say. And we can move on to this year's elections.
Let's win some points.
Let's win some points. Well, let's see who is going to win points and how. We're going to take a look at the candidates, key themes and issues, and how do these candidates campaign. So first, the candidates. Of course, Joe Biden represents the Democratic Party. Donald Trump is the candidate for the Republican Party. And these are two old men. So that makes it maybe a little more important to also take a quick look at the vice presidential candidates. So Donald Trump picked Mike Pence, who is currently his vice president, as his running mate again. And picking a vice president is also a strategic decision. So Donald Trump picked Mike Pence because he's very popular among a group of voters that is very important for the Republican Party, in particular social conservative religious voters. So by picking Mike Pence, he can more easily appeal to this group of voters. Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. She, of course, is younger than he is, a woman, has a mixed race background, and is also able to appeal more directly to key constituency, well, to key voting groups for the Democratic Party.
And she's a great debater.
She is
much better than Biden.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's your
that's your opinion.
That's your opinion. I'm still thinking about what my opinion is actually on that. But she is a great debater. I thought she did very well. Yes, absolutely. So she has to appeal to these groups of voters as well, the young people, women, racial minorities, important groups of voters for the Democratic Party. But let's take a closer look at the candidates themselves. Joe Biden was born in a working class family, a Catholic working class family in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he basically spent most of his career in politics. His first election was in 1972 when he tried to become the senator for the state of Delaware. And he won those elections, became senator, and basically was able to maintain that position until 2009 when he became the vice president, of course, under Barack Obama.
So he's been in politics for 48 years.
For almost half a century.
Wow.
Yes. And this is also not the first time that he's running for president. He already tried in the 1980s. Then again in 2008, when Barack Obama, of course, became the Democratic candidate, and he ended up as the vice presidential candidate. And this is the third time. Yeah. And, well, one of the things that Joe Biden is also quite known for is that he tends to make a lot of gaffes. He doesn't always know what state he is in while campaigning. He's an old man, of course. He's 77 years old. If he becomes president of the United States, he'll be the oldest president in U.S. history. And, well, he seems a little bit confused sometimes. Donald Trump calls him Sleepy Joe. Also, some people think he's a bit boring, and that's something that Trump, of course, wants to accentuate, wants to emphasize. And he's a bit confused sometimes, like in this case where he accidentally confused his wife and his sister. Let's take a look.
It's a good night. It's a good night. And it seems to be getting even better. They don't call Super Tuesday for nothing. By the way, this is my little sister, Valerie, and I'm Jill's husband. Oh, no, this is oh, you switched on me. This is my wife, this is my sister. They switched on me. All right. Look.
Okay, so this can happen to anyone, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they switched on him. But somehow this seems to happen a little bit more often to Joe Biden than to other people. And this is something that Trump, of course, uses in his campaign, right? As I mentioned, he calls him Sleepy Joe. He says he's an old man. He's losing it. He doesn't, you know, why would you vote for this confused old man? You don't want him to become the next president of the United States. Let's take a look at how Trump uses that.
Now, Sleepy Joe would say the unemployment rate in the great state of Ohio. No, you're in South Carolina. Joe, you're in South. They come up and you ever see the guy that no, it's South Carolina, it's not Ohio. Okay. And he goes, all right, Iowa? Did you say Iowa? No. I did that like 7 times. If I did that once, it would be the end of the road, right? Be the end of the road.
If Donald Trump would just do that once, it would be the end of the road, right? If Trump would ever say anything funny or whatever, it would be the end of the road. Let's take a look at Donald Trump. He has a very different background compared to Joe Biden. He was actually born in a rich, wealthy family in New York. His father was into real estate, and in 1971, Donald Trump followed in his footsteps, took over the family company, named it the Trump Organization. He likes to stick his name on things like buildings, for example, as you can see in that picture. Owned casinos, Miss America, Miss Universe elections, resorts like Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where he also spends a lot of time himself, also now while as president. Golf courses, he was married 3 times. Of course, on the right side, you see him with his current wife, Melania, the First Lady of the United States, and their son, Barron. This was already before he became president. And there's a tiny picture up there, because Donald Trump was not only a businessman. He's not only just a businessman, but he's also a real showman. And he is very good at presenting himself as a very successful businessman. And one of the ways in which many Americans became familiar with Donald Trump or got to know him better, because many people had already heard about him, I guess, but the way in which he was able to present himself to the big public was through a reality TV show called The Apprentice. And this was a TV show with a whole group of people who wanted to become the next Donald Trump in a way. So he was an example to these people. And it was a reality TV show, but it was also scripted, so they could really control the image that they created, the image that they put forward of Donald Trump as this very successful businessman.
I remember the probably the one thing that has stuck with everybody who's seen that show is, of course, he's firing people left and right, like he did as president too. You are fired.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes, definitely. And he had some practice firing people.
Oh, yeah.
And he was proud of that. He liked that sentence as well. And I think it was actually his password for Twitter for a while, before
MAGA 2020 exclamation mark.
Exactly that. Yes. So, he is very good at presenting himself as a very successful man, as a successful businessman. And I think his campaign has also presented him as a very successful president. Let's take a look at a campaign video by the Trump campaign in which they do this. And also, what I want you to focus on is the fact that Joe Biden, of course, is a typical politician, has a long career in politics, and he will say, and Obama will also say this, he has a lot of experience, he knows what he's doing, he knows the people in Washington, he knows how to get things done in Washington. Vote for this guy. Donald Trump will say, well, Joe Biden spends so much time in Washington, is a typical career politician, he's part of this corrupt political establishment. The swamp, and I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm a businessman, not me, but Trump. He'll say, I am an outsider. I have nothing to do with that corrupt political establishment. I'm going to clean things up. I'm a businessman. I know how to get things done. And as an outsider, I'm the ideal person to do that. And in this video, this contrast is something that the Trump campaign also really emphasizes. Let's take a look.
We come together to imagine a future determined by the shining light of our hopes and values and faith. A country where we are judged by our character with dignity and respect for all. The belief that all are created equal, that lives matter irrespective of race, creed, or color. committed to excelling beyond our dreams. 4 years ago, we faced an historic crossroad. Career politicians promising change every election, but delivering emptiness. We chose a different path, a man who is not a politician, a man who cares, a man who works tirelessly for you. Still, politicians spun their deceptions and obstructed progress, fanning the flames of lawlessness. We all know that it is easy to criticize. It takes a true leader to solve problems. COVID-19, while others criticize without solutions, President Trump's swift action saved lives. And as leading Democrats want to keep businesses closed down, our president is leading the way for a full economic recovery. We are America. We as Americans work together to overcome challenges, write our own stories. America, land of promise, land of opportunity, land of heroes, land of greatness.
Yes, we Americans write our own stories, is what the narrator said. And this was a typical campaign video, right? When we see Donald Trump, we see clear blue skies, happy people, waving flags. And again, he is presented as not just a successful businessman, but as a very successful president. He's presented as a successful president and very clearly positioned in contrast against those career politicians like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. And when we saw Trump, we saw these clear blue skies and beautiful light and everything. But when the camera zoomed in on the others, well, let's say the Democrats, they didn't look too good, right? These were not the most flattering images of these candidates. And this is also how these campaign videos work. And just to illustrate, I want to show you a video which is not a real campaign video. It's called Our Guy, Their Guy. But it's a parody on how these political campaign videos work and really emphasizing the kinds of techniques that they tend to use. And these are techniques that not only the Republicans use, but the Democrats will use these as well. And I think that we are going to watch a few more campaign videos. And when you watch these, I do think that you'll recognize some of these elements. Let's take a look. It's called Our Guy, Their Guy.
This election, your choice couldn't be more important. Our candidate is in flattering lighting and full bright color. Their candidate is in grainy high contrast black and white, spotted through a telephoto lens from behind a bush, coming back from God only knows where. Our guy points at the horizon and holds a baby. Their guy doesn't have a baby. Their guy has a golf club. The voiceover for our guy is calm, measured, bright. Their guy gets the lower register, and sometimes we slow down. Our guy has clean headlines and the beautiful lens flare America needs. Here's a scary graph over a photo of their guy awkwardly laughing. Snap zoom. Do you want to snap zoom like that in office? Here's a photo of our guy saluting military veterans. Jump cuts, flashes, static, aggressive colors. You can't trust a guy with graphics like this. Our guy gets stock footage of sunrises and an American flag. Their guy's flag is upside down and on fire, intercut with overdue bills, war, and a crying baby. Our guy gets doctors and astronauts and stimulus checks. Flatline, an eagle, hurricane, the Statue of Liberty, crime scene tape, Ronald Reagan, a girl running in a wheat field to escape a dangerous sexual predator, welding, atomic bomb. This election, the choice is yours. Their guy or our guy. Inspiring slogan.
Yeah, it's a hilarious video, Albertine, but at the same time, it really makes you aware of how easy it is to make the other person suspect.
Yes.
And of course, that addresses the whole issue of how the social media have been used in increasingly in campaigns to darken the other side.
Yes, and not the social media.
It's very funny, but it's also very scary, I find.
Just campaigning in general has become very negative, mostly focused on like creating a negative image of the other side, more so at times than really presenting one's own vision or demonstrating what one has to offer what the candidate himself is going to do, mostly more attacking the other ones. Yeah, and if you watch a video like this, the choice becomes pretty easy, right? Their guy, our guy. If this is the choice you're presented with, well, golf club or baby. I don't know. Let's take a look at some of the key issues in this campaign. I think already in the video from the Donald Trump campaign, we saw some important issues mentioned. We saw COVID, we saw the economy. Pew Research asked American voters about their top issues in the 2020 elections. And we see that, so they asked everyone here. The things they mentioned are the economy, healthcare, Supreme Court nominations, coronavirus outbreak, violent crime, foreign policy, a whole list. But what I think is particularly interesting this year is that when they asked Democrats and Republicans to mention their key issues, they didn't really mention the same things. The top 5 in particular is very different. And these are the top 5 most important issues to these people. So they asked Trump supporters, and on number 1, we see the economy. And we also see the economy come back on the list of Biden supporters on number 4, but it's there. Violent crime mentioned by the Trump supporters, not by the Biden supporters. Immigration, Supreme Court nominations, gun policy. These 4 issues do not come back on the list of Biden supporters. There we see healthcare on number 1, the coronavirus outbreak, race and ethnic inequality, the economy, and climate change. And so 4 years ago, most Republicans and Democrats could still agree somewhat about what the key issues were, what the problems were that the country saw itself faced with. But they disagreed about the solutions to these problems. But right now, they can't even agree about what the problems actually are, right? In the video that we saw, it seemed that the coronavirus outbreak had almost been solved by Donald Trump, while this is still high on the list for Biden supporters.
Do you think that an issue like violent crime or healthcare, of course, that's important for everybody, but are people one-issue voters? Would the importance of a single issue be enough to bring someone to vote for one or the other candidate?
I think that really depends on the person. I think there, particularly social conservative voters, abortion is a typical one-issue voter. Is a single issue that determines the vote of quite a lot of serious social conservative religious voters, for example. But for most people, I think it's a combination of issues. I think it may be good to take a quick look at 2 campaign videos, one by the Trump campaign and one by the Biden campaign, about issues that are important to these to their voters that are high on the list. Healthcare in the case of the Biden campaign, violent crime for the Trump campaign. And I think it may be good to take a look while watching these videos that while they're very different on a certain level, very different, deal with very different issues, the technique they use, the way in which they approach the issue, and the campaign here is in fact very similar. Let's take a look at these 2 videos. First, a campaign video by the Democrats about healthcare.
My son Beckett was 2 years old when he was diagnosed with leukemia. He would get sick, Aubrey would take him to the bathroom, and she would rub his back. Our family is fighting this every single day. If Donald Trump gets rid of our healthcare law, my son won't be protected. We would have to be making some tough decisions about what medications we can afford. We need a president who will protect our healthcare, and that's Joe Biden.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Okay, and now the video by the Trump campaign about violent crime.
Seattle's pledge to defund its police department by 50%. even including a proposal to remove 911 dispatchers from police control.
Joe Biden said he's absolutely on board with defunding the police. Listen closely.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello, you've reached 911. I'm sorry that there is no one here to answer your emergency call, but leave a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.
Crime will rise significantly.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Yes, so two very different topics, two different videos from two campaigns, but in a sense, they're also very similar, right? Both are very emotional in a way. They tap into fears. They're not so much about what the candidates themselves have to offer, what they intend to do, but they create an idea of what will happen, an image of what will happen if the other one wins, right? It's tapping into fear if Joe Biden wins. This old lady, they both have really vulnerable people as the protagonists. This old lady will get hurt, right? You won't be safe in Joe Biden's America. But the message of the Biden video is also, in a sense, you won't be safe in Donald Trump's America because he is going to take away health care and this child will suffer as a result. So both very emotional and very much focused on what will happen if the other one wins.
This is something that always surprises me about America too. Being American myself, my image of America, and many people in Europe as well, see Americans as being upbeat, positive, wanting to move forward, the American dream, always on the up and up. And I've never really understood why in the campaigns there's so much emphasis on the negative and, as you said, the fear. That doesn't seem to me to be the American way.
Right. Well, you see both in the campaigns, right? Because all the things you just described, we saw those in that Trump video. We saw these American flags, the Constitution, I think, etc. It was very upbeat leadership, very upbeat video. Right, so we also do see that, and we also see videos by the Biden campaign saying, you know, this is what we want to do. But there's also a lot of negative campaigning, and I'm afraid that in the end, emotions are very strong. You know, can really influence people's behavior in a very direct way. And fear is a particularly strong emotion that, is very functional when you try to motivate people, to convince them of the idea that there is a sense of urgency in voting, right? Because if it's all, you also have to explain to the people that you want to get out and vote for you, that it's important and that it will also have consequences if they don't do it, in a sense. At least that is one of the things that plays a role in this. So I think it is a very functional tool in that sense. But are those issues, healthcare, violent crime, etc., are those really the reason that people vote for a certain candidate? Well, Pew Research asked the American people again, and this is what Biden supporters and Trump supporters mentioned. If we look at the list of Trump supporters, we see that leadership and his performance plays an important role, right? So these are people who are probably happy with how he led the country during the last 4 years, who are happy about his performance. Then we see in the policy issues in second place, basically. And in third place, we see he is not Biden. If we look, however, at the Biden supporters, we see that the key reason for many people who intend to vote for Joe Biden is that he is not Trump, right? So these people may not be particularly enthusiastic about Joe Biden so much, but they really dislike Trump. They're really, they will vote for Biden mainly because he is not Trump.
That's what we call a backhanded compliment.
Right. And didn't you, is this a settle for Biden situation?
Oh, yes. I went to Boom Chicago recently, the American stand-up comedy improv group, and they had a show in which they did literally a song and dance at the end and were calling on people to settle for Biden.
Okay.
Which, of course, is not a very enthusiastic.
So it kind of reflects the spirit of this response, you want to say.
It does, very much.
I understand that you included a video. Of that
just a short clip of the
I
song
wasn't
and
there,
dance.
so let's take a look.
Okay.
So for Joe. Now here's the thing, folks. We all want something exciting to vote for, and it is not Joe Biden. He is ordinary. He's not special. He's not like fancy Sunday brunch. He's not Eggs Benedict with avocado and champagne. He is cold cereal. Right? Joe Biden is Special K.
I also like Special K. I have 3 bowls a day. I call it Special KKK. With milk that's extra white. Settle for Joe, he's not your Iron Man. Settle for Joe, your Bernie bro. He's not your rock, not your gold. Not too hot, not too cold. Not too shy, not too bold. Not too young, not too...
He is super old.
He's pretty old. But at least he doesn't tell you to inject yourself with bleach.
Okay, yeah. So that's the spirit.
Biden is Special K.
Yeah, he's not Eggs Benedict with champagne and avocado. He's not Trump. And the other things that Biden voters mentioned are his leadership and performance, second place, and they also mentioned his personality and temperament. And temperament is not something that we see back on the list of Donald Trump voters. And this has become a very important issue also in the Biden campaign. They have embraced this, the contrast between the temperament and character of this very kind grandpa, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, making decency a key campaign issue. And I want to show you a video that really focuses on this. And to understand the video, it may be useful to know that Joe Biden used to stutter as a child. He got over this, and now when he meets kids who do stutter, he sometimes gives his phone number so they can contact him and he can help them and teach them how he got over it. And this is something that this campaign video really zooms in on to make Joe Biden look good while contrasting him very clearly with Donald Trump. And you'll also notice some of those techniques with the screen turning red, etc., that you saw in that our guy, their guy video. Let's take a look.
We have to go see studies. We want to hear you speak. Oh man, come on! I tell you what. Don't let it define you. You are smart as hell. You really are. You can do that. Can I get a phone number for you, and I can tell you what I used to do? There's about 25 stutterers I continue to work with this, but I promise you you can do it. And you know when I say I know about bullies, you know about bullies. The kids who make fun.
Bullies are cowards who tear others down.
I don't know what I said. I don't remember. Knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise.
It's time for decency. It's time for Joe Biden.
It's going to change, honey. I promise you. I promise you. Sorry if I call him Dad.
The Lincoln Project is responsible.
Okay, so that brings us to the big question. Who is going to win the presidential elections, of course? Well, a few things to keep in mind as you watch the polls and as you watch the results come in. First of all, of course, we already discussed this during the first part. Winning the presidential elections in the United States is not about winning the popular vote. So it is all about the Electoral College. So when you hear about national polls, they don't mean that much. So ignore those, right? Focus on the states. And here, it is very important to realize that some states are more important to watch than other states. There are many states in the US where it is already clear who's going to win, because every time California, just to keep mentioning your state, goes to the Democrats, basically. We're pretty certain that the Democrats will win, so we call this a safe state. So on the map, all the dark blue and the dark red states are safe states. And so the darker the color of the states, the more certain it is, or the more likely it is, let's put it that way, that this state will go, the blue states will go to the Democrats and the red ones to the Republicans. But there are a bunch of states that are kind of brownish, sand color. And these are the swing states. And they are called the swing states because they can swing both ways. Sometimes they vote for the Republicans, sometimes for the Democrats, and the margin between the two candidates is very small there. So these are the states where the elections still need to be determined. And these are the states where the candidates are focusing their attention, that the candidates are visiting, on which they focus most of their attention, and these are also the main states to watch when the results come in. So Florida is very important as a swing state, and Pennsylvania, very important. Keep an eye on those states. Also, you may have noticed that many people already voted in the United States.
How many million already? I believe 90 million people have already voted.
Yes, and in some states, more people have already voted now than the total amount of people, the total number of people that voted 4 years ago.
Yeah, in Texas.
For example,
that's the case.
Yes.
Yeah. So huge turnout.
Huge turnout, and often high voter turnout often benefits the Democrats. They tend to be more dependent on groups of voters that do not always show up when it comes to it. Young people, racial minorities, poor people. Also because it is often more difficult for them to vote. For example, we've seen images of people who had to wait in line for 8 hours. And on the one hand, this can demonstrate voter enthusiasm, but you may also have heard of something like voter suppression. And what we have seen is that in some states, many polling stations, and these are the places where people vote, have been closed down. And particularly on college campuses, where young people tend to vote, and in neighborhoods that where we see a rising number of African American and Latino people. And this makes it more difficult for them to vote because they have to travel farther. Maybe they don't have a car. Maybe they, if they have to wait in line for 8 hours, they'll have to take an entire day off. And not everyone can afford this. So this is also more difficult for poorer people. And the Democrats tend to depend more on these groups of voters. And in general, the United States tends to have quite low voter turnout. But we do see that when voter turnout is high, for example, when Barack Obama won in 2008 and 2012, he was able to get people to the polls that don't always show up, like those young people, like minorities.
I remember reading that I think the general turnout is on average something like 56%, and for Obama it was over 61%.
Right, yeah.
And I would be surprised if we didn't go over that 61% this time.
And so voter turnout already seems to be very, very high this time. Normally, though, voter turnout in the United States tend to be relatively low compared to other countries. Yeah. And by this time, most people have already made up their mind, right, about who they're going to vote for. And in the last stages of the campaign, the focus tends to be very much, not so much on convincing people to vote for me or for my party, but on convincing the people who have already decided to vote for me to actually show up and vote. So the focus at the moment is on the Get Out the Vote campaigns. And you mentioned that when you introduced me, that I also used to work as a journalist. And I helped cover the campaigns in 2008 and the elections in 2008 and 2012, and also joined some of these people who were involved in these Get Out the Vote campaigns. And what they do is they go knock on doors, and this is what is happening in all the swing states at the moment. People are knocking on doors, and they have a whole script of what to say. And what happens, suppose I'm a Republican, and I knock on a door, someone opens, and I'll say, well, hello, good morning. Who do you intend to vote for? And if that person says that he or she is going to vote for the other party, for the Democrat, I will say, okay, thank you very much, have a good day, and I'll move to the next door. Knock again. If someone opens and that person intends to vote for my party, then I will start asking questions. So I'm not going to try to convince the person who is going to vote for the other party to vote for my party. I just move on to the next door, and I'm going to ask them, did you register to vote? Because in the United States, if you want to vote, you have to register to vote first. Excuse me. If they didn't register, I will ask them, well, I will help them to register immediately. And thank you. And next question I will ask them is, do you know where you have to vote? If they don't know where they have to vote, I will tell them. I may even ask them to sign a pledge to vote card, because research has shown that when people pledge to vote, just by signing a card, chances are higher that they will actually show up on election day.
Even though that card doesn't have any legal binding status or anything?
No legal status. It's just a psychological thing.
Signed for something.
You promised that you were going to do that, and chances are higher that you will actually do that. Yeah. So that is what the campaign is very much focused on at the moment. People from states also, people who don't live in a swing state will call people living in swing states, because there it still matters. They can still make a difference there. And they will call them and tell them, go vote if you didn't do this yet. It's very important. So voter turnout, in the end, is very important. Brings us back to that big question, of course, who will win? And whether we will see, well, the thing is, I don't know. Sorry. That's an anticlimax. I don't know who's going to win, whether we're going to see more of these dances, happy dances by Kamala Harris or by Donald Trump, will in the end really depend on every vote of all the people that in the end showed up to vote, to go through the trouble of voting, whether they had to wait in line for 8 hours or just send in their ballot by mail. They need to be counted, and only then we will know what the outcome is.
Oh, Albertine, I can't wait. We've been living towards this moment for so long, and I think we're all kind of tired. And
yes,
and it could be quite a while before we really do know the outcome. If this goes to the courts or even to the Supreme Court, it could still take a while.
And anything could happen, right? I mean,
popular vote, Electoral College.
Yes, you know, it could happen again that Donald Trump wins the Electoral College, but not the popular vote. It could be a landslide. I don't know. We don't know. We have to wait and see.
Okay. That's what Trump always says, too. Wait and see.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to see what happens when the votes do come in, of course, and when they are being counted, how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
But probably we won't know on Election Day.
We'll all be up late tomorrow night on Election Day, and on the 4th, we may still very well not know, but we have another election event coming up very soon on November 4th, the day after, and it's also called the day after. I would be surprised if we already knew who the winner is, but there will be plenty to talk about, I'm sure of that. And we have invited 5 speakers from the U.S. to share their impressions of Election Day and what they expect afterwards. Our moderators will be the journalist and America expert Laila Frank and the Dutch professor Maarten van Rossum. And our speakers are Russell Shorto, who is my predecessor as the director of the John Adams Institute and a well-known writer and journalist, George Packer, whom we saw last night, for example, in Nieuwsuur, Kim Whaley, who is an expert on the Constitution. She spoke at the John Adams on Super Tuesday in March. Daniel Ziblot, who is a Harvard professor of government, who also spoke at the John Adams the year before. And a new face, Arun Chowdhury, who was the videographer of Obama and the director of the digital campaign for Bernie Sanders. So we'll be excited to hear their observations on these most important elections ever, right, Albertine?
According to the candidates.
According to the candidates.
But I think they're pretty important.
I think they're pretty important, too. And they certainly got us all galvanized and engaged and very curious to see what's going to happen because it matters.
It does matter.
I already voted, by the way. I'm one of those 90 million. Albertine, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Learned a lot. And I hope our students and their teachers have enjoyed this and will watch it many times in the future to learn about how the system works. And looking back on whoever won, once we know, this video will have historic value.
Let's see.
Okay, let's see. Wait and see.
Wait and see.
Thank you, Albertine.